to sum up his life in one word, killed. Doesn't say much about the essence of a man.
To think of him in the cold earth. How did he get there? Did he get shot? Was he in pain?
Across the world today, in fields like these, lie the bodies of hundreds of thousands of fallen British servicemen yet to be identified.
That's from one of ours.
Each man left behind family, desperate to know the fate of their loved one.
Solving these tragic mysteries that have haunted generations may seem impossible.
But help is at hand. In this special episode of Long Lost Family, we meet the elite all-female team at the Ministry of Defence, the War Detectives.
We start off with a case number. Through detective work, we try to give him a name, so they become a person, they become alive to us.
With unprecedented access, we follow the investigations.
Qu'est-ce que vous avez trouvé?
3 restes mortels de soldats britanniques.
Using state-of-the-art forensics and groundbreaking technology.
The remains were found at the other end of the field, about 700 metres away.
The bodies of unknown British soldiers are identified.
We've got the results.
This is a huge thing.
We're able to give these men names.
We discover the untold stories of men who fought and died for their country.
Every single one of these soldiers, they were somebody's son, they were somebody's brother, they were somebody's husband.
And answer their families' questions about their fate.
We have results from the DNA test.
Okay.
And it is him.
As these extraordinary investigations unfold, secrets hidden for decades are unearthed.
He never knew.
A double life?
Well, it is.
Relatives are brought together.
Wonderful.
You look like a Maroni.
And families have the chance to honour their fallen loved ones at last.
After 101 years, to bring him to a proper resting place.
The story is complete.
He's part of the family. And although he did die, he'll never die.
Each year, around 60 bodies of British servicemen killed in battle are found by farmers, builders and archaeologists worldwide. They're referred to Imjin Barracks, home of the Ministry of Defence's Joint Casualty and Compassionate Centre, the War Detectives.
Every investigation that the War Detectives take on starts as just a case number, the anonymous remains of a soldier. The detective's mission is to identify that soldier.
Brilliant. So we have got a starting point for this case. Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
The detective's first investigation is Case 370. It dates back over 100 years to the First World War.
This is an interesting case. It involves remains that were discovered by a local resident outside of a small village called Anu in northern France. The gentleman was actually installing a drainage pipe across his property when he realised that he was uncovering human remains.
When bodies are discovered accidentally like this, specialists are brought in to retrieve the casualty and the bones are sent for forensic analysis. Whilst a DNA profile is created for the bones at the laboratory, I've travelled to France to find out more about the discovery.
Bonjour, Olivier.
Bonjour.
Davina.
Along with War Detective Tracy, I'm meeting Olivier Quentin, who helped uncover the remains.
Alors, Olivier, qu'est-ce que vous avez trouvé ici?
Alors nous avons trouvé 3 restes mortels de soldats.
3.
3 soldats britanniques.
Ça doit se passer beaucoup ici, avec tous les soldats qui sont tombés dans la guerre.
Oui, chaque année, on retrouve encore de nombreux soldats de toutes nationalités.
Oui, j'imagine.
Commonwealth, allemands ou français.
Wow. And Tracy, what do you know about this area? Was there a battle being fought here?
So this area was infamous for a battle called the Battle of Cambrai in November of 1917.
I mean, is there anything you can tell me about the soldiers that fought at that time?
they were all conscripts from all different parts of the army. We had tank regiment, we had infantry, there were snipers.
Alors le premier indice qu'on a trouvé tout de suite sur place, hein, donc c'est cet insigne.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
Avec le,
That's amazing.
le régiment.
Wow.
Et London.
That is incredible.
It's the 23rd London Regiment.
That's a huge clue. Merci, Olivier.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci, monsieur. Merci.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
In November 1917, the 23rd London Regiment were part of the British assault on the German-occupied town of Cambrai. This was one of the first modern battles of World War I. Following 3 years of futile trench warfare, the British Army broke the stalemate by attacking with tanks, planes and infantry together. But the Germans launched a huge counterattack, and after 2 weeks of bitter fighting, there were about 45,000 British casualties. At the heart of the Cambrai battlefield stands a Commonwealth War Graves Commission memorial. It commemorates more than 7,000 soldiers killed in the battle whose bodies have not yet been found.
Oh my goodness, East Surrey lost so many. Look at all the privates. That's terrible.
I know.
Amongst them are those still missing from the 23rd Battalion of the London Regiment.
There we go, the London Regiment. That's right.
Wow.
So we've got one lieutenant, so Second Lieutenant Aldridge.
Yeah.
And 12 others.
That's
so
incredible.
3 out of that 13. Let me just take a picture of that. There we go.
The remains recently uncovered in the back garden must belong to 3 of these 13 soldiers whose whereabouts have been unknown for over 100 years.
But which 3 men? Back in London, War Detective Nicola Nash is trying to narrow down the search.
I'm hoping that looking at the service records is going to help us get closer to finding out who those remains belong to.
The British Army service records for the London Regiment are housed at the National Archives in Kew. It's here that Nicola can find out more information about each of the 13 potential soldiers that might help the investigation.
This is John James Steele. He's our youngest one, 17, when he joined. You know, incredibly young, and it details where he was working, which was a biscuit factory. This is Benjamin Stamborough. He was 29 in a stationer's cutter. This one's the service record for Henry Wallington, so he was only 19. So it's great to see all these little personal details, all sort of different professions. You know, one of them's even married with 2 children, which really makes you think, you know, how hard it must have been for their families. But crucially, they give us the ages and the heights of the soldiers when they joined the army.
Finding the ages and heights of the possible candidates is a real breakthrough. Because the forensic report on the bones also gives estimates for the ages and heights of the 3 recently unearthed bodies. Today, this report has arrived at Injin Barracks.
Thanks. The war detectives are going to talk me through how they cross-reference the ages and heights of the 3 bodies with the soldiers on the service records to find which are the best matches.
Tracy has the details on each of the 3 bodies.
So casualty 1 had a height of approximately 6'1".
That's tall.
Very tall for First World War, yes. And his age is between 20 and 25. Casualty 2 was 5'6", and his age was between 17 and 23. And casualty 3, 5'7", between 20 and 24.
So do any of these characteristics match those records?
So we have got details they could cross-reference with. The first was a Second Lieutenant Aldridge. He was actually 34.
So
that
do
actually
we discount him?
I think we do at this stage. We've got a Private Mead. We haven't got a height for him, but we know he was 23, so that's a possibility. Private Steele was 5'9" and 19 when he was killed, so he could fit in with casualty 2.
That's quite a discrepancy, 5'6" to 5'9".
It is, but we have to understand that that was their height when they joined, and young men joining up might well have grown a few inches.
OK.
And then we've got a Private Thatcher. He was 5 foot and 37, so another one that is less likely.
37 years old, that's really elderly for First World War service, isn't it?
Yes. And Private Wallington, 5'6.5" and age 20.
Out of the candidates, Mead, Steele and Wallington fit within the ranges that we've got for our 3 casualties.
So these men are the most likely at this stage?
At this stage, yes. And we just have to hope that they have got a viable family donor that we can match with those casualties.
The war detectives have 3 potential names for the bodies. Now, if they can find a living relative for these men, a DNA test comparing them to the DNA of the remains can hopefully prove the identity of the dead soldiers.
Everybody belongs to someone, you know, every single one of these unknown soldiers. They were somebody's son, they were somebody's husband, they were somebody's brother.
Nicola is starting with the youngest soldier, the biscuit factory worker John Steele, just 17 years old on the service records. John was still only 19 when he died.
He was far too young, really, to be married and have any children.
So to search for relatives alive today, Nicola has to go back to the 1901 census to see if John had any brothers or sisters. John was one of 8 siblings. And by following his sister Lillian's line, Nicola has found a great niece, Sandra White, and made contact with her.
I know about my great-uncle John because my nan always had his photo on the mantelpiece. She would say, "That's my dear John, my lovely John." And he just got killed in the war.
John was from a big farming family in Hampshire. At the turn of the century, the family moved to London, and when war broke out, John was working in the biscuit factory in Fulham, alongside his sister Lillian.
My nan was only a year older than him, so they were very close when the war started. He was 16, too young. But his 3 elder brothers went, "Come on, son, we're not, fighting it just for you, so you've got to sign up as well." When you see John in his uniform, he looks as if it's too big. It looks as if he's borrowed it from his dad. When you see boys dress up, to think of him in the mud, in the cold earth, really. How did he get there? Did he get shot, and was he in pain? I'm sure my nan, over the years, did think of that, but she would never voice that, because I think if you voice it, it becomes real. And I don't think Nan ever wanted it to be real, really.
Even though her nan has passed away, the question of what happened to John still haunts Sandra.
I think it's important that he's not forgotten. There's a gap missing from the family. And I look at the photo and I think, we're not forgot you, I'm searching.
If Sandra's DNA matches one of the 3 bodies discovered in France, it will mean that great-uncle John Steele has been found.
It would be just marvellous to think that he's recognised and he has a grave. And that would be a nice end, to a very short life, really.
While Sandra's DNA is sent to the lab for processing, Nicola has started work on Private Frank Mead's genealogy.
We're looking at the 1901 census. I can see here his father and mother, Thomas and Elizabeth, and here's Frank himself, 6 years old at the time. And we can see here that he's actually got a younger brother, Reginald, who is only 9 months old. So that's fantastic news. He's got a brother, meaning potentially there's descendants.
Reginald did go on to have a family, and Nicola has tracked down his grandson, Paul Mead, great-nephew of Frank, living over 5,000 miles away.
This album is well over 100 years old.
Paul emigrated from Britain to the States when he was a teenager, along with his sister Julia.
This is Frank Mead. I think he looks maybe pensive but hopeful in this picture, and proud to be wearing the uniform. And then his younger brother, Reginald Mead, your great-grandfather, my grandfather.
I can see the resemblance.
It's like each photo has its own story attached.
Yeah.
Paul and Julia grew up knowing very little about their father's side of the family.
My father passed away when I was very young. I was just a year and a half old when the Ministry of Defense contacted us and told us they had discovered remains which could be my great-uncle Frank. At first I didn't know what to believe about it.
So Paul contacted his family back in England to find out more about his great-uncle.
My cousin Christopher sent me these letters, photographs, and outstanding caricatures by Frank. Just have these few glimpses into his life before the war. They're incredible. They just give wonderful insights into Frank's sense of humor, you know, his interests as a young man.
Frank joined the war early in 1914 and served on the Western Front for 3 years as a stretcher bearer. He wrote regularly to his younger brother, Reg.
In his letters, there's an intimacy, I think, that you have between brothers. Old Fritz has a new kind of gas now, which he sends over in a shell. It makes you sneeze and also makes your eyes water. We've all learned about the horrors of gas, but Frank was making light of it. It's like he didn't want Reg to really worry, you know, his little brother.
But by the time Frank wrote on October the 5th, 1917, the reality of 3 years of trench warfare had hit home.
The tone of the letter is a bit more stark. Dear Reg, I'm writing this letter in a small funk hole, which I share with 3 other fellows, as it is a bit of a squash. You must excuse the scrawl. I guess you have had the wind up a trifle lately, Reg, during the air raids. Never mind, oh boy, you're much better off in England than out here.
The final letter in the collection is from Reg, back to Frank just 2 months later.
Unfortunately, Frank never received that. It was returned unopened, you know, just written on the cover, killed. Just to sum up his life in one word, killed, is, you know, doesn't say much about the essence of a man.
With Paul having provided a DNA sample alongside this treasure trove of family history, the war detectives hope to be one step closer towards identifying the fallen soldiers.
The difference between what we do and when you're just reading a history book is that we're actually getting to know these individual men, you know. We sort of build up an actual personality of this man. The fact that these men were so young, you know, and you can relate them to your family members, and, you know, also the military that we work with, you know, I think they can see themselves in these men. And that just brings them closer to us.
Now, the only thing the detectives can do is wait for the DNA results.
On the 3rd of December 1917, 3 young soldiers were killed in the First World War Battle of Cambrai on the Western Front. Nearly 100 years later, a farmer digging a drain in his garden stumbled upon the bodies, and the war detectives are trying to identify them.
He would be a suitable donor for DNA to compare.
DNA kits have been sent out to the relatives of 2 possible soldiers, biscuit factory worker Private John Steele and Private Frank Mead. And now War Detective Nicola Nash has discovered a descendant for a 3rd, Private Henry Wallington.
So I've been looking into Wallington's family history, and it's very complex. However, I've managed to find a half-nephew, and he has said he's willing to provide us with a DNA sample.
The relative does not want to appear on camera, but amazingly, he did turn out to be a positive DNA match. So the war detectives have identified their first fallen soldier as Private Henry Wallington.
Good morning, it's Nicola Nash calling from the Ministry of Defence.
The team have informed as many relatives as they can find about their discovery. And one of them, Margot Baines, who lives in Lincolnshire, has agreed to meet me. Hi, Margot.
Hello, Nicky.
How are you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Well, what did you know about Henry Wallington before the MOD contacted you?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing. This is the long-lost relative that we didn't know about, but we do now. Nicola filled us in with some of the details. Henry was my half-uncle. So he was my father's half-brother. They had the same father, Joseph. Joseph already had a wife, and he had 4 children, Henry being one of them. But Joseph had an affair with a lady called Violet, my grandmother. They had 2 children between them, one of them being my father.
This is very interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is.
A double life?
Yes, yes.
Was your father fully aware he had a half-brother?
He was never aware that he had. He never knew. As far as I know, he never knew.
So this was a bolt out the blue?
Yes. Yes, it was. And I felt sad, really. He's part of the family. And it's that strong feeling that, although he died, we carry his genes. And so, yes. Although he did die, he'll never die.
Having discovered a half-uncle she knew nothing about, Margot's been in touch with Henry's side of the family, and a nephew, John Henry Costin, was able to provide more information about him. Private Henry Wallington was a 19-year-old from Catford, South London, who worked for his stockbroker dad. He enlisted in 1916 and fought for almost 2 years before he was killed. Henry's body lay undiscovered in a garden in France for nearly a century. Now he can finally be buried officially with a headstone bearing his name. But the 2 soldiers found with him are still to be identified. And back at HQ, the results have come in from the DNA tests. The first is for Private John Steele. His great-niece Sandra has spent the last 40 years wanting to answer her grandmother's questions about what happened to him. And I'm on my way to Croydon to tell her the DNA results.
This is going to be so hard for Sandra, but sadly, the DNA result came back negative. The remains that were found did not belong to John Steele.
War Detective Nicola is joining me to break the news.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Yes, nice to see you.
Right. Thank you.
Hi,
Hi, Sandra. How are you doing?
Unfortunately, this is a key part of the war detective's job because as DNA tests are done with any potential matches, there's always a chance that the results will not be positive.
We have had the results.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Oh. No,
It's a negative.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I am so sorry.
Well, yes, it would have been lovely to put him to rest. I mean, my nan always had that picture on the mantelpiece, and now and again she'd give it a dust and a kiss, and well, I think of him nearly every day.
Oh my goodness, he just looks so young, doesn't he?
But, yeah, I think Nan always felt, you know, where is he? And I always thought that if it was him, get me going, that I could imagine saying, come on, John, come home now. Oh, sorry. But, yeah, that would have been nice, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm so sorry. I know it's so difficult. But we do know that that particular group all died on the 3rd of December, and John was one of those. They all fought together, lived together, so there's every chance that they would have been with John right up to the very end.
I've always thought that even if it wasn't John, I mean, there's thousands of them, as long as he's there with his friends. But he's still loved, he'll still be with me. He'll come home one day. He will. Yeah.
Later the same day, we've come to the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich. This is where thousands of men from London, like Privates Steele, Wallington and Meade, signed up and trained for the Great War. We're here to make contact with the relative of our last potential soldier, Private Frank Meade, his great-nephew in America.
Oh my goodness, Paul!
Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
So I'm Davina, and this is Nicola. I just wanted to ask you a few questions, if that's all right.
Oh, perfectly.
I mean, was Frank Meade somebody that you knew a lot about in your family?
We have learned a lot more, and we're hoping to learn more to be able to connect yourself to the history of your family, who shaped you, who makes you who you are.
Especially now that we live here in the States.
It only brings you together because we all share that heritage.
Well, we did get the results of
The DNA test. And it is a match.
It's wonderful. It really is.
And Nicola, thank you so much.
So it's fantastic news, obviously, you know. I'm just so pleased that we've managed to name him and that he's finally going to get a resting place.
He'll be buried at the same time as the two other lads that he was with.
You know, it'll be, this may sound strange, really wonderful to meet those other families.
Yeah.
Because he never had children, he never had a family of his own. These would have been the people who he was probably closest with, and they died together.
They were actually deliberately buried by their comrades in a back garden.
Wow.
So with special care, and now, you know, they're going to be buried in their named grave.
I wouldn't miss this memorial service for anything.
So it is, huh?
It is.
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Nicole told me that when he fell in battle with his two other mates, the other soldiers buried them in a garden before they moved on. I thought that was very touching, that they would do that after 101 years to find the remains. And just going to be a full honor burial.
He died at 23, but, you know, his story is going to continue on.
It's the day before the military burial for Case 370. 3 soldiers from the London Regiment found in a garden together in northern France. Attending the ceremony will be the Meade family, who have travelled from California to the town of Arras. During the war, Arras was on the front line, and thousands of British troops, including the London Regiment, would have passed through its streets on the way to the trenches. Today, the Meads are following in their footsteps as they arrive to commemorate Great-Uncle Frank, who has been found at last.
There was a sense of relief, for us that it was his remains. From his letters, he was a very insightful young man. We know he deeply loved his family, especially his younger brother. A little bit of who Frank was, and wherever that comes from, wherever Frank got it from, I think it's in all of us too.
And that just gives me kind of a lump in my throat just thinking about that. To Frank.
And to Frank.
Uncle Frank.
Great Uncle Frank.
Tomorrow, Frank will be buried by the Princess of Wales Royal Regiment, the modern descendant of the 23rd London Regiment that Frank served with.
It's very important to us, and it's important as well that the regiment are involved and they can see, no matter when he died, whether it was 100 years ago or yesterday, they're still going to be remembered.
Frank will be laid to rest alongside two of his comrades in arms. One has been identified as Private Henry Wallington, whose half-niece Margot will attend the ceremony. Sadly, for the last soldier, none of the potential relatives who did DNA tests were a match. His identity remains a mystery, and at this point, he will have to be buried as an unknown soldier. But there will be someone attending who wants to pay her respects to him. Sandra White's great-uncle John was killed at the same time as the other soldiers, but the DNA results didn't match, so his body has not been found. Despite this, Sandra's made the trip to France for the ceremony.
I wanted to come really, mainly for the boy who's not been named. It's just so sad that someone's gone through all that and died, and there's nobody there for him. So me and John will be there just to say goodbye to him.
The closest Sandra can get to saying goodbye to John himself is to see his name commemorated on the Combray Memorial.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you.
Have you found John?
Yeah, he's here.
Oh, wow.
And it's just wonderful to see his name in stone. It's just marvellous. I mean, it'll always be there. I can't stop touching it because it's just so real to me.
It's really nice for me to see their three
together.
Names together.
Seeing John amongst all these people, all these soldier boys, well, they are boys to me, I get a sense of comradeship. He wasn't alone.
Yes.
When his time came, so that gives me
comfort.
A warm heart. Yeah.
And is that part of the reason why you've come for the unknown soldier?
Yes. Because I'm so proud of them, and just to say thank you doesn't seem enough, but there isn't any other words that I can say, really. Thousands of them are so young to give their life for us.
Today, Frank Meade, Henry Wallington, and the unknown soldier will be buried at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery, Hermes Hill.
Hi, Margot. How are you?
Okay, thank you.
How are you?
Nice
to meet you.
For each relative, this ceremony means something different. For Paul, it's a chance to get to know the British side of his family that he knows so little about. For Margot, it finally lays to rest a family secret. And for Sandra, it's an occasion to honour her great-uncle John. But for all of them, it brings them closer to their long-lost fallen soldier.
Present arms!
You know, with 3 kids of my own, from the time your children are born, you dream about what they might accomplish and do in life. And I'm sure the regret and this loss would have overwhelmed his parents, knowing that they would never see that.
We stand before 3 of the brave, and we remember them this day.
I am the family face. Flesh perishes. I live on.
Actually finally seeing these 3 boys being put to rest, you know, when you've worked on a case for so long, we learn to love them and accept them as part of our family. So when it comes to this day, it's just as emotional for us as if we were real family to them.
Today, we give a place to 3, where many still don't have a place. We therefore commit their bodies to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
I do feel a closure thinking of my John. You know, I know he's died and I know he's not here, but he's with me in spirit. Yeah, just praying for them all today, just to rest now.
I had a very emotional connection when Frank was being laid to rest because I feel he was a lot like my father, who perished way too young. And I think Frank, even though he never had children himself, I think he's alive in us, and that will continue on forever.
Case 370 is closed. But back at HQ, new evidence has come to light on an old case of World War I casualties, originally buried as unknown soldiers.
We can now look at different groups of men who were killed in that area.
It seems a burial is not always the end of the story. In this special episode of Long Lost Family, we're following the War Detectives, a team from the MOD with backgrounds in research, archaeology, and the military. Their mission is to identify as many service personnel lost in battle as possible, either bodies discovered in farmers' fields or those buried in war cemeteries as unknown soldiers.
Every time I see a grave that is unknown, the first thing I want to do is take a photo of it and then see if I can identify it.
Sometimes extensive research proves without doubt who is buried in the unknown grave, and a name can be added without doing a DNA test. But sometimes new evidence comes to light on a previous DNA investigation, and that's exactly what's just happened.
In 2010, archaeologists excavated the remains of 6 soldiers in a farmer's field near Ypres in Belgium. It was called Case 272.
On est tombé sur une fosse commune où ces corps étaient alignés. De 1, on est parti sur 2, 3, puis il y en a eu 4, 5, et aujourd'hui on termine cette fouille avec un 6e corps. Mais on pourrait encore avoir des surprises.
La seule chose qu'on a, je veux dire, c'est que ces 2 petits fermiers encore ici.
4 of the bodies were impossible to identify, but artefacts beside the other 2 suggested they were Lancashire Fusiliers from the First World War. DNA was taken, but no matches were found, and the men were buried as unknown soldiers. But now, War Detective Louise Dorr thinks she's found something that sheds new light on the investigation.
We were originally told that the remains were found in this corner of this field here, but from looking at the footage we can see here a gabled house just over the shoulder of the archaeologist when he talks. And when we've checked on Google Maps, that house is the other end of the field, 700, 800 metres away.
Discovering that the remains of the 2 Lancashire Fusiliers were found in a different location has thrown the case wide open. Having previously done DNA tests with living relatives of men killed at the incorrect part of the field, they all came back negative. So now, the war detectives have researched which Fusiliers were killed at the specific new location, and they're going to share this with me.
Hi, Louise and Tracy.
Hello.
Hi.
So this case, we have revisited.
Yes, and we've now got a new group of Lancashire Fusiliers that we're hoping to test.
Have we been able to narrow it down to names?
We have. The Fusiliers Annual lists all the burial places of all the men that they'd lost.
So we can eliminate those that have already got a burial place.
So our potentials for this case are Private Frederick Foskett, Private Charles Moroney, Private William Purslow and Private William Taylor. They were killed very near the German front line in the early months of the war, and that ties in exactly with where they were found.
We actually know how they were killed as well. They were together, hiding by a railway line in a culvert. And they were killed by a shell.
Our 2 soldiers were killed just 11 weeks after the start of the war, on the 18th of October 1914, as British troops fought near the famous battleground of Ypres in Belgium. At this early stage of the war, there was no conscription. The men fighting were largely made up of soldiers who'd already served across the Empire. So the types of men we're looking for could well be experienced soldiers.
To get a firm identification for the fallen soldiers, Louise needs a DNA match, and that requires a living relative. The first lead is for Private Frederick Foskett. I'm back at the barracks to talk to Louise and see what she's found out about Frederick.
Hi, Louise.
Hi, Nicky. Grab yourself a chair.
Thank you. What do we know about Frederick Foskett?
Well, we know from the 1901 census, Frederick was from East Finchley in London. He had a brother and 4 sisters, all living at the same address.
So what was he doing before the war?
He was already serving with the Lancashire Fusiliers.
So he was a professional soldier?
He was a professional soldier.
Have you found any relatives?
I did. I started off with his eldest brother, Charles. I found him and his wife and a baby son, Charles Frederick Foskett. It was quite easy to find a marriage for him and the birth of his son, Colin.
Colin Foskett, now aged 69, has been found living in a small village in the east of England.
When the letter came, I opened it and the first thing I saw was Ministry of Defence at the top, and I said to my wife, aren't I a bit too old to be called up?
Colin lives with his wife Carol. Together they have 3 children, 9 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. But despite this huge family, Colin knows very little about his origins.
From the age of 2, I was in an orphanage and knew nothing about any family before then whatsoever. Suddenly, after all these years, to know about my past, you know, where my great-uncle was and what he'd done, and I just couldn't believe it.
Discovering that Frederick fought in World War I has a special significance for the Fosketts.
Ricky, our eldest grandson, he's a private in the army. At the moment, he's stationed in Cyprus. I'm really hoping it is Frederick Foskett, because the whole family is so excited. To see his name on a gravestone would be really emotional.
Back at HQ, Louise has dug up an obituary for another of the possible candidates, Private Charles Moroney.
He was 23 years of age and he's behind a widow and a child. He was in the army for 9 years, and then it looks as if he left, decided to settle down into Civvy Street, got married and became a grocer with the Cooperative Society. Then war broke out and he was called back up again.
But despite all this information, Louise has been unable to find a living relative for Charles Moroney. So she's been forced to try a different tack and send out an appeal in the Manchester local press, where most of the Lancashire Fusiliers came from.
They lay where they fell for almost a century. Brave men who gave their lives in the First World War. After painstaking research, possible names have been released with the hope of tracing relatives. They are Privates William Cheetham Taylor, Charles Moroney, and William Purslow. This is our war detectives' last hope of identifying the unknown soldiers found near Ypres in Belgium.
OK. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
And amazingly, there's been a response.
It all started when I read the newspaper article in the Manchester Evening News. Are you related to these heroes of the trenches?
Sue Price is from Preston and works for the police force.
Private Charles Moroney is my great-uncle. He married in 1913 and they had a son, Charles Jr. It was a real tragedy when Charles died. My father spoke often about Charles's son, who never ever met his father. It must have been a harrowing time when he lost his life in 1914 for the whole of the family.
But although Sue came forward, the war detectives needed a more direct line for DNA comparison. So Sue went in search for any other relatives on social media.
Good morning. I had a message. Are you Cavan Moroney? And I just replied, yes. And it turned out to be my second cousin, Sue.
Cavan is descended from Private Charles Moroney's younger brother, Joseph. He provided the DNA sample, and now Sue and Cavan are meeting for the first time in London.
It was amazing to discover Cavan. I'm excited to meet him today.
It actually opened a whole new chapter. My mother and father were estranged from the time I was 5. As far as I was concerned, the side of the family on my father's side were dead to me. Now I've got a whole new family, and I'm really looking forward to meeting Sue.
Hello.
Lovely to see you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You look like a Moroney.
Another family I've got now.
Yeah, absolutely. So lovely to see you.
Sue and Cavan have come together in London today because the new DNA results are back for Case 272. I'm meeting the war detectives at the Tower of London, the original headquarters for the Fusiliers, the regiment our unknown soldiers belong to.
Hi, nice to see you.
And you, too. We've got the results from the Moroney family. Unfortunately, it's negative.
Oh. Is there anything else that we can offer the family to help?
There is actually. This is from the Cooperative Workers newspaper, and it's got a photo of Charles Moroney.
Oh, look at that. That's amazing.
And it talks about where he was employed in the green fruit department. at Bullion Street in Manchester.
Oh.
And then a letter that was written to his wife.
And this is information that they won't have. So to see a picture and have something, I think that will be better than nothing.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing? I'm
Fine,
Davina.
thank you.
Lovely to meet you,
Nice to
Campbell.
meet you.
Hi. Lovely to meet you, Sue. So thank you for joining us today. We have got the results in, and I am really sorry to say that it's negative. I'm really sorry we couldn't give you good news. We want to give you a bit of information about him.
We're bitterly disappointed that we weren't able to have a positive identification. We found an obituary and a picture of him from earlier in his military career.
It's amazing. I've just never seen a photograph of him. So.
And a letter that Charles wrote to his wife a few days before he died.
Dear wife, it is a great pleasure to me to answer your most welcome letter and thank you for the parcel, which I may say was a kind of a godsend. Sorry.
Do you want me to carry on? Yeah.
Come here. I'm fine. I'm sorry, I'm fine. I'm very pleased to hear that you and the little one are getting on all right. It's good old Salford saying. A couple of nights ago, we had to watch a village with fixed bayonets, and the sights the enemy left behind were awful. It was a most pitiful sight to see the people who had been driven from their homes with their little children. We got very well treated by the French people. It was laughable to hear our chaps asking for du pain, which is the French for bread. The Germans are just beginning to start their shelling again, and I'm afraid I'll have to bring this letter to close. Oh.
What's it like reading his words?
You just can't imagine what they obviously went through when they were over there. But at least we've got a photograph of him. I've never seen a photograph of him.
The very sad thing is that he had a son that I was only 12 months old when he died. In fact, Charles had only been married a few months more than that.
So it's very sad.
It does become really personal. Yeah. You know, we feel like we've failed if we can't put his name on a headstone. So we won't stop looking.
Oh, thank you for that, but you do an amazing job.
You really do. And you found each other.
Yes.
Yes, that's the bonus. You know, I've got a new family.
Sadly, 2 other DNA tests taken for Privates Purslow and Cheetham Taylor also came back negative. So the war detective's last chance to put a name on one of the headstones lies with the Foskett family. The war detectives are trying to identify the remains of 2 Lancashire Fusiliers killed near Ypres and buried as unknown soldiers. So far, all the DNA tests have come back negative, but the last possibility is Colin Foskett's great-uncle Frederick.
So you didn't really know anything about your history, did you, at all?
Colin knew nothing about his past because he grew up in Clare. But thanks to the war detectives, he recently discovered not only that he had a great-uncle, but that Frederick fought and died in World War I. And today he's here with his wife Carol and daughter Lara to find out whether Frederick has been found.
Oh, hi, Colin.
Hello there.
It's lovely to meet you. Oh, hi, Carol.
Lovely to meet you.
Hi, Lara.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Colin, can you tell me all of this? What does it mean to you?
Oh, it's amazing, absolutely amazing, because I knew nothing about my family. I was put in an orphanage at the age of 2 and saw my mother probably half a dozen times that I can remember in my life. And then all of a sudden, you know, I've now got this extended family.
And Carol and Lara, what's it been like for you?
Well, we feel for him.
Because obviously he's got a family he didn't know he had, which is good.
My son's in the army. He joined 3 years ago. And how was that? Were you a bit like, no, don't? I've only just stopped crying when he visits and when he leaves. So.
And are you guys nervous?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Well, I have got the result.
Have you?
And it is him.
Oh. I can't do that. Yeah, now that's it. No.
Completely understandable. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is. After all this time, it's just, yeah, unbelievable.
This is actually a Lancashire Fusiliers cap badge, which was found with the remains.
Oh, look at that. I'm shaking.
Yes, am I.
And also a few coins here.
It's just so amazing that they can come up with a match after 100 years.
We know that Frederick was killed by a shell.
Whenever you talk about your past, you talk about your family, and my dad never had that, so now he does, so.
Well, the next step is we will order a new headstone, which will have his name.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
To be able to see his gravestone gone from unknown soldier to Frederick Foskett would be, well, overwhelming.
Today, Colin is following the journey his great-uncle Frederick undertook at the outbreak of war in 1914 and heading to Belgium.
I feel a connection with my great-uncle because I've had no other real family to look back on.
When Frederick's body was discovered in 2010, it couldn't be identified, so he was buried as an unknown soldier of the Great War. Now, after years of investigation by the war detectives, his grave will be rededicated with a new headstone bearing his name.
Tomorrow, I don't know whether you can say celebrate, but we can actually say, instead of being one of the unknown, he at least now has got a name.
Joining Colin, Carol and Lara for the ceremony are Colin's soldier grandson Ricky and his wife Rosie.
I've been serving now for 4 years. But when I found out that I've got someone else in the family that served, it's quite nice knowing that I'm doing the job that they went through. With Rose being pregnant as well, generations down the line can remember that the family have been serving and done the part of the country.
More than 100 years ago, 2 Lancashire Fusiliers arrived on these shores to fight. Just weeks later, they were dead, and now the war detectives have succeeded in naming one of them. Private Frederick Foskett.
We've come together to give thanks for the life of Private Frederick Foskett, killed in action on the 18th of October, 1914.
They shall grow not old.
He was lost for more than 100 years, but today, 27-year-old Frederick from East Finchley can finally be remembered.
When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today.
It's been definitely worth opening case 272 again. If there's a chance that we can give these men back their names, it's worth it. I just can't imagine the horror that Frederick's parents must have gone through, never knowing when they went to their own graves what had happened to their boy. And today, at least, we've managed to put some of that to rest.
Not far from the cemetery is the field where Frederick was killed.
It was about 2 to 3 feet in and about 200 yards from the entrance. So.
Yeah, it's around here.
I now know, more of my history. I've got a family that, I can be proud of.
Crying. I just can't believe it.
he was so young. 27, the same age as me. I mean, I've got my first child on the way, all my life to look forward to, and he's out here dying